The sky over Benin City was grey that morning, heavy like a secret that refused to fall as rain. Drums beat slow and deep from the palace square, like a heart mourning inside a chest. The air smelled of incense, red earth, palm wine, and quiet tears. People lined the streets from Ring Road to the Great Gates, whispering about the late King Irowa, a man whose presence filled rooms and whose eyes could silence crowds. Into the silence, a black SUV rolled through the old city, past the bronze casters, past women selling plantain and garden eggs, and stopped before the palace. From the back seat came down Prince Eromosele, tall, fine, with the sharp calm of someone who had seen the world and still remembered home. He had been abroad for school and business, but he was Benin's son before he was anything else. He walked with steps that respected the soil and greeted the elders with both hands. He hugged the yashe, nodded to the palace chiefs, and bowed to the shrine where white chalk told stories of the ancestors. People watched him and whispered, "He looks like his father," and "See how grace follows him," and "This one was born for the crown." But grief sat on him like a cloak. He had arrived too late to hear his father's last words. He felt the kind of pain that sits in the throat and refuses to move. Inside the great hall, red clothes hung low, cowries glowed like small moons, and the carved doors watched like quiet witnesses. Eromosele stood near the throne with its leopard carvings and closed his eyes to breathe. He tried to remember his father's laugh, the warm smell of his wrapper, the way the old man said, "My son, in this life you must be wise like the tortoise, but pure like rain." The hall was cold not because of the air, but because the king was gone. People moved like shadows, touching his arm, pouring careful words, and stepping back with respect. He felt alone in the middle of a crowd, like a river in a forest that refuses to join the sea. That was when he saw her, standing like a candle in the dim light of the corridor. Lady Efe, the king's newest wife, younger than the other queens, graceful like a dancer. Her wrapper was deep blue with bronze beads shining softly. Her eyes were the kind that tell stories without talking. When their eyes met, his chest stuttered. It felt wrong and yet familiar, like a song he had heard long ago, a song he had loved and lost. She looked at him as if the world had paused. For a moment, the drums became a heartbeat. He bowed, because respect is older than desire. "My lady," he said. She lowered her gaze and replied, "My prince," and her voice carried the same quiet thunder he remembered in dreams he couldn't name. Something shifted inside him. He blinked, and the world resumed. Rumor moves faster than palm oil on hot rice. The palace felt it, the chiefs felt it, the older queens felt it, even the rafters complained at night when the bats came to rest. They said the new queen had come from nowhere. They said the king married her to calm an old storm. They said she had a past that followed her like a shadow at noon. Stories wanted to be told, but mouths stayed shut because the earth around the throne was sacred, and secrets in palaces walk on soft feet. The burial rites stretched across days. The whole kingdom moved like a single drum. Elders poured libation, maidens danced with calabashes. Masquerades swept the ground like wind made flesh. Eromosele did everything right. He wore white chalk, he greeted the chiefs, he cried when it was time to cry. But whenever he looked up, he found those eyes again, waiting at the edge of the hall, hidden behind a curtain or reflected in a brass tree. And each time he felt a pull like tide. He fought it, because he was his father's son, and because the earth sees what men hide, but fighting did not make it live. The first time they spoke alone was in the courtyard at dusk. The sky was purple, and the air smelled of rain that was still thinking. Charcoal smoke rose from a corner where a guard roasted corn. Far inside the corridor, a palace drummer practiced soft rhythms, like conversations between ancestors. Efe stood beside a carved pillar, tracing a pattern with her finger, her back straight, her head tied high. He did not mean to walk towards her. His feet had their own will. My lady, he said again, softer this time. My prince, she answered, and her voice shook. He asked how she was keeping. She said she was fine. He asked if the palace was kind to her. She said the palace is a place with many doors, and some doors are locked. He looked at her for longer than he should. He saw a sadness in her that wore perfume and beads and still could not hide. He wanted to ask why. He did not. Instead, he said something simple about the weather. She smiled, and the smile was a small light in a dark room. When he walked away, he could still feel it on his skin. Days turned like pages. Condolences poured in. Posters with the king's face fluttered on electric poles from Airport Road to Ugbowo. Friends from Lagos came with flowers and soft voices. One of them, Osaige, the prince's childhood friend, squeezed his shoulder and whispered, Bro, watch your six. These palace waters are deep. Eromosele nodded because he knew. But the heart is its own stubborn animal. It walks into forests that maps refuse to draw. The second time they spoke alone was beneath the old Udala tree near the back gate, where palace mates came to gossip and peel cassava. This time, the sky had decided to rain. Soft, steady rain that kissed the leaves and washed the world clean. Efe's wrapper was green, and raindrops hung on her eyelashes like tiny jewels. They stood too close for strangers. She told him she was sorry for his loss. He told her the kingdom would protect her. She looked up at him, and the rain made everything new and old at once. There's a story in me, she said quietly, and it is fighting to come out. He swallowed. Some stories are better held, he replied, but his fingers trembled. She took a small step back, like a dancer who knows the music is dangerous. You are a good man, she said, and that is a heavy crown. Then she left, and he was sure the rain had learned how to write her name across the earth. After the burial, the palace changed. It became a place of whispers. Chiefs moved like chess pieces. The Yashe called secret meetings. The older queens watched Efe with eyes that could slice water. Some thought she would be sent back to her people. Some thought she would be given to another royal relative. Some thought she would disappear. But she stayed. They laughed like people who had finally reached a place their map warned against. They spoke about the future the way children speak about chocolate cake, full of pictures, full of fate. On the third night, when the electricity blinked, Lagos rain danced hard against the windows like the sky had been waiting patiently and then snapped. And the room tasted like a promise that might keep itself. Efe sat by the window and opened a small box she had carried in her wrapper since Benin. Inside was a dull ring with scratch marks that looked like stubborn hands. She held it and her hands shook so much. The prince stood and steadied her fingers without thinking. She turned, and something deep and old moved in her eyes. She breathed like someone walking up a hill, carrying a secret on her head. Eromosele, she said, calling his full name for the first time. He felt that name land on his skin like a blessing that had waited too long. What is it? He asked. She swallowed. There is something I must tell you. If I do not speak, the truth will drag us by the ankle. If I speak, it might cut us clean. He took her hands. Speak, he said, because he was brave and because he did not know which trouble was waiting. She told her story, and the room leaned in to listen. Years ago, when the prince left Nigeria, he had loved a girl in Benin. Her name was Imade. She was small like laughter and strong like a palm tree that survived 3 storms. They had promised each other the simple future that fits into 2 hands. But life can be a crooked market. Imade's mother fell sick. Bills piled like yam. A man came with help that carried a hook. He promised a job in Lagos that was clean and good. Imade left without a goodbye because shame also has feet. The job was not a job. It was a room with no windows and a door that only opened for cruelty. She ran away with broken sandals and a burning heart. The city was big, but hunger was bigger. She found work in a small canteen, washing plates until her fingers wrinkled like sadness. She changed her name to Efe because the old name felt like a cloth with too much blood on it. In that same season, an old royal retainer from Benin saw her serving stew, recognized something in her face, and carried a message back to the king. There is a girl in Lagos who looks like a prayer. The king had problems older than dust. The chiefs were fighting like cousins over land. The people wanted a sign that the gods were still smiling. The king thought a new queen would be that sign. They brought Efe to Benin. They placed beads on her neck. They told her the palace was a safe river. They did not ask her heart, because hearts are small and palaces are large. She became queen like a tree becomes a home for birds that did not plant it. She did not know where the prince had gone, only that his memory sat in her like a stubborn seed. Then the king died, and the prince came home, and the seed woke up like harmattan fire. When she finished, the rain had softened and the city exhaled. Eromosele could not breathe for a long time. He knew it even before she said his old name, Imade. The name carried every sunny afternoon they had shared, and every dream they drew on exercise book paper. He remembered waiting for her at the junction that never became a meeting place. He remembered searching. He remembered thinking she had chosen someone else or something else. He remembered trying to bury her in months and works and airports. He looked at Efe and saw Imade, and saw the king's queen, and saw the girl who had survived, and the woman who now wore beads she never asked for. He stood up and sat down and stood up again. The room felt too small for the truth. He walked to the mirror and did not recognize his face. He wanted to shout and laugh and cry and break and build in one moment. He turned back to her. Imade, he whispered, and the word fell from his lip like a prayer that forgot where to land. She nodded and cried quietly, covering her mouth as if to stop sorrow from escaping and waking the neighbors. They hugged like two people falling from the same height and finding each other in the air. The hug was pure, no wrong fire sat in it, only grief and relief and the kind of love that makes even the walls forgive. Then the world rushed back. He pulled away with new terror in his eyes. "You are my father's wife," he said, finally tasting the full meaning of the ring and the beads and the palace. She shut her eyes and the tears became rivers. "I did not know it would be you," she said. "I did not know the road would bend this way." They stayed like that for a long time, with the rain counting seconds on the window and the city pretending not to care. The next morning, the prince was a man walking two roads at once. One road led back to Benin, to duty, to tradition, to the place where names are heavier than bones. The other road led forward into a city where love could be honest if it were not already a scandal. Osaige came with groceries and eyes that saw too much. He found the ring on the table. He found Efe's face. He put two and two together and exhaled a long breath. "This movie is not Nollywood," he said softly. "This one is the kind the gods watch." Eromosele told him everything. Osaige listened, paced, and then said, "Truth is better than silence, but truth has teeth. If you must tell it, choose where it bites." They agreed on one thing. They could not live in the shadows like thieves. They must face the council, face the queens, face the world. Efe nodded with a strength that made her look taller. Back in Benin, the palace was stirring like a pot left too long on fire. The Yashaya had sent people to Lagos to search for smoke. They returned with whispers. The prince was seen with the young queen. They were staying in a quiet place. They were not hiding enough. The older queens sat in a circle and let their silence grow close. One of them said, "May the hurt choose right over rumor," but her eyes were hard as broken kola. Eromosele and Efe returned to Benin in broad daylight. They wore simple clothes. They walked through the palace gate and knelt before the shrine first, because a person who wants forgiveness must greet the ground that knows their footprints. The chiefs gathered, the queens gathered, the courtyard became full like market day. The air was thick with heat and with the sound of flies that loved tension. The Yashet tapped his staff once, then twice. "Speak," he said, and the word rolled through the crowd like thunder that has stolen someone's name. And the prince stayed too, because the council needed him and because the kingdom was watching. At night, he walked the long corridors and listened to the palace breathe. He heard guards cough in the darkness, heard night birds cry, heard his own heart count steps he could not climb down from. They started meeting in places that forgot to judge, in the kitchen where smoke hugged pots and laughter covered sin, in the storeroom where yam tubers lay like sleeping soldiers, near the shrine where fresh chalk waited for fresh prayers. They did not touch. They spoke in careful lines. They told stories that did not reveal names. He told her how Lagos tasted like speed and salt. She told him how a small village river could teach patience. He told her how the world felt empty without someone he once loved. She looked away and said, "The world hides people and then returns them like lost coins." The palace cat rubbed against their ankles as if it knew. A maid named Adesua once caught a glimpse of them and felt a shiver run through her like a warning that arrived in a song. Osage visited again and pulled the prince to one corner. "My guy, you are playing with fire," he said in a half joke, half plea. "Fire burns palace roofs differently." Eromosele smiled and said nothing. Osage sighed. "Okay, but hear me. If you must swim, know the crocodiles by name." The prince laughed softly, but the laugh had weight. One night, when the moon was shy and the generator hummed like a distant bee, the prince sat in his father's library. Books lined the walls, histories, proverbs, treatises, travel tales. He picked a book about the old Benin roads and saw a small slip of paper inside, pressed like a leaf. On it was a single sentence in his father's handwriting: "Protect what you love with truth, or you will end up protecting a lie with your life." His breath caught. He looked up and there she was at the door, holding a lantern that painted honey on her cheek. "I could not sleep," she said. He nodded. "The night is full," he replied. She came in and sat across from him. They were quiet for a long time. The generator cut off and the silence became a wall. In that hollow quiet, he heard his own heart do the foolish brave thing. He reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She did not pull back. That was how the line was crossed. Not with thunder, but with a lantern and a page and a sigh. After that, the world changed shape. They met with great care, but the very hair had new taste. A hen scratching the ground could scare them apart like children. A footstep in the hall could make them hold their breath until time hurts. They spoke of living. They drew maps with chalk on the back of a tray. Lagos glowed on those maps like a promise. He said he could make a life for them there. She asked what kind of a life a secret can live. He said, "We will make it honest by loving it loudly." She smiled with tears in the corners of her eyes. "You are your father's son," she said, and he took those words like a blessing, not knowing they were also a bell. The Yashe grew suspicious. He watched the prince's eyes follow the young queen. He noted the way Efe's wrist shook when the prince entered a room. He remembered the old stories, the ones elders whisper with their heads bent, as if rain is falling only on their lips. He called the older queens. They said the same thing. That woman came with dust around her feet. The Ashes sent a message to a chief in Lagos, a man who wore a fine agbada and an even finer smile that never reached his eyes. The chief sent back a warning. "Lagos is a big mouth. It eats secrets like suya." The Ashe tapped his staff twice on the floor and decided to let fate reveal what it had already written. A night came like a deep pocket. The prince and Efe slipped through a small gate behind the yam stall, while the guard snored with his cap over his face. A keke waited at the junction. The driver had the long face of a man who minds his business and the sharp eyes of someone who knows the price of silence. They climbed in and kept their heads down. Benin City slid past like a dream that might turn. The rain had just finished, so the road shone and street lights made broken golden rivers. They reached a bus park before dawn, where life was already awake. Agberos shouted destinations: Uselu, Ugbawo, Lagos Straight, no stopping, and women in wrappers balanced bowls of bread and akara on their heads like crowns they wore since birth. They joined a bus to Lagos, slipped into the back row, and sat like strangers who shared the same heartbeat. The road was long and full of stories. At Ore, they ate roasted corn and coconut while pretending not to look at each other. At Ijebu, They bought sachet water that felt too cold for their dry throats. Near Shagamu, a policeman stopped the bus and asked too many questions with too few smiles. The driver answered with a tired voice, and a small bundle of money made honesty unnecessary. Efe kept her face turned to the window, watching countryside roll by like a film that knows how to hurt softly. The prince watched her and thought about vows he had never spoken out loud, but had already tied inside his chest. When Lagos finally opened its big mouth in the afternoon, it was loud and hot and fast. Dampos flew like yellow fish. Traffic crawled like a patient snake. Vendors tapped windows with granuts and bottled drinks. Billboard faces smiled like promises they could not keep. The city smelled of petrol, rain, sweat, hope, and small miracles. Osage called the prince's phone 3 times. Eromosele ignored it twice and then picked. "Where you dey?" Osage asked. Eromosele said, "I am safe." Osage sighed. "Bro, this your safe is standing inside fire," he said, but he sent an address anyway. An apartment in Surulere where the air conditioner worked and the neighbors did not care. They settled. Heat settling can happen to hearts that have nowhere to rest. In that small apartment, time grew legs and walked differently. Morning was coffee and quiet radio and curtains in the slow wind. Afternoon was fried plantain and plans, spoken in whispers. Night was the room turning blue and the city humming like an ocean. They did not do anything the world will punish with words you cannot say on a clean mouth. But love filled the space like scent, thick and gentle, and their hands were always finding each other like prayer beads. Eromoseli stood and lifted his chin. He looked like his father then, strong, sure, stubborn, honest. He said he had found the woman he once loved, the woman he had searched for, the woman who had been swallowed by the city and spat out into the palace. He said he had found her wearing beads she did not ask for, carrying a crown she did not choose. He said he loved her still, and that love had made him foolish enough to run. He did not say what happened in Lagos because some truths are not for public streets. He reached for Efe's hand, and she let him. A loud murmur rose like harmattan dust. The older queens hissed as one. The Yashe's eyes narrowed until they were only warnings. "You have placed your mouth on Pepe," the Yashe said, voice cool. "And now you are surprised when tears come out of your eyes?" Effie came forward then, shoulders straight, eyes quiet. She told her story again, short and clean, like water poured slowly into a bowl. She said she had been Imade. She said hunger is a wicked teacher. She said she had become Efe and then queen because the road had narrowed. She said she did not know the king's son was the same boy whose name had lived inside her chest, like a stubborn star. She bowed her head. "If there is blame, let it fall where it should," she said, and the courtier leaned in to see where that place was. Silence held the palace by the throat. Then, from the far end of the hall, a slow clap began. One man, two, three, and the crowd parted. An old man walked in, taller in spirit than in body. His wrapper was white, his head bare, his staff simple. He walked like someone whose steps taught the floor how to hold weight. Some gasped, some fell to their knees. Eromoseli's heart froze. Efe's finger dug into her own palm. The old man smiled a sad smile that belonged to both joy and pain. It was King Irowa, alive. Alive in a way that made hearts stop and drums forget their lines. Alive in a way that made the walls tremble and the roof remember its duty. The Yashe bowed so low his forehead tasted dust. The older queens wailed without sound. Eromoseli's mouth opened but no words found their way. Only the sky knew how to hold that shock. The king raised a hand. The courtyard obeyed. His voice filled the space with a strength the earth had missed. "Be still," he said, and it was as if thunder asked rain to wait. He explained with the slow patience of a man who had seen too much war to waste words. There had been a threat, old and ugly, that wanted the throne. The council had begged him to disappear for a season, to fake a burial, to watch the snakes come out. He had agreed for the sake of the kingdom. He had watched from shadows as men showed their real faces. He had seen who was friend and who was termite. His eyes landed on Eromosele. I saw my son too, he said, and his voice softened. I saw a good man walking towards a well without water. Then he looked at Efe with a gaze that carried both father and king. I knew her story, he said. I knew she carried a name like a scar. I married her to keep wolves from her door. There are things a king does that looks like madness from outside but are mercy from within. He paused. I did not know the gods would play this kind of game. The sound under Eromosele chose that moment to tilt. The world went distant, like he was standing behind himself, watching a play he did not audition for. His father alive, his love the queen, his heart a river without banks. The crowd watched his face the way people watch clouds for rain that would save or drown them. He stared at the king, then at Efe, then at the ring on the table before the shrine. The ring he had once promised to a girl under a mango tree, the ring now on a queen's finger. He heard the elder's proverb, truth is bitter, but it cleans the mouth, and the bitterness flooded him like the ocean breaking a small cup. Father, he said, and the word cracked. You were alive and you watched? King Irowa's eyes shone. I watched to keep this house standing. Eromosele's laughter came out wrong, too loud, too sharp. He looked at the faces, he looked at the sky, he looked back at Efe. She was crying softly, a queen and a girl at once, whispering his name with her eyes. The prince stepped backward, then forward, as if learning how to walk in a new gravity. He pressed his fingers to his temples, as if to hold the world inside. The drum of his heart ran ahead of him, forgot the rhythm, and fell. Sometimes pain does not shout. Sometimes it whispers until your mind cannot find its floor. Sometimes shock is not a thunderclap, but a slow river that sighs and floods a city without raising its voice. Eromoseli started to smile. It was the kind of smile that made Osage's stomach drop. He laughed once, a short, bright sound that did not match the day. He looked at the king and bowed too low and too long. He turned to Efe and said, Imade, with a joy that carried a crack. He turned to the crowd and spread his arms as if about to bless them. My people, he said, see love, see truth, see how both can break a strong man. He started to clap for no reason. He started to walk in a circle. He started to sing a children's song about rain and lizards and hot ground. He began to tell a joke without a punchline to a guard who was not laughing. He tried to step onto a stool that wasn't there and fell into a nail, then stood and bowed to a pillar as if it were a chief. The courtyard went cold with a fear that tastes like metal. Osage rushed forward, but the Yashe held him back gently, tears alive in the old man's eyes. Let him, the Yashe whispered, voice breaking. The mind protects itself the way it knows. Eromosele moved towards the shrine, gentle now, like a boy approaching a river that has swallowed a friend. He picked up white chalk and drew a line across his own forehead. He smiled at nothing. He whispered to voices only he could hear. Then, with a sudden childlike joy, he ran, out of the hall, through the courtyard, past the guards who dared not hold a prince with madness in his eyes and a crown's blood in his veins. He ran into the street where Benin City was doing what cities do, selling, buying, shouting, laughing. He ran like someone who thought the world was a game and he had finally learned the rules. People called his name. He waved at them. He laughed at the sky. He stopped at a small puddle and bowed to his reflection as if meeting an old friend. Then he ran again into the rain that had finally decided to fall. Behind him, the king stood very still. Efe crumpled quietly, the beads on her neck clinking like little judgments. Osage covered his face and spoke prayers he had not used since he was a boy. The older queens were silent because even enemies know how to respect certain kinds of pain. The Yashe leaned on his staff and let two tears cut tracks through his old dignity. The palace cat sat beside the shrine and watched the door, tail moving like a metronome that knew the day's rhythm had broken forever. Days followed, as days must. The prince did not return to the person he had been. He wandered the palace like someone searching for where a song kept its mouth. Sometimes he stood by the gate and told stories to children about a bird that fell in love with the sky and paid the price. Sometimes he sat beneath the udala tree and counted ants like stars. Sometimes he laughed at stone. Sometimes he cried at wind. No one mocked him. The market women brought him akara for free. The guards bowed deeper when he passed. The elders greeted him with both hands. People whispered, "A good man carries scars when the wound is hidden." The city learned a new kind of quiet when he walked by. Efe asked to leave the palace. The king agreed with a face that had aged 10 years in 10 days. Before she left, she came to the courtyard at dawn. Eromosele was there, playing with the chalk, drawing a circle and a line and a circle and a line until it looked like a new language. She sat beside him, not too close. "I am going," she said. He nodded and smiled at a bird on the wall. "Take the rain with you," he said. She wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her then, full and clear for one heartbeat. The old Eromosele stood in that gaze, like a tall tree refusing to bow. "I found you," he said gently, "and then the world took both of us." The clarity slipped. He returned to his drawings. She watched him for a long time because love does not know how to live without looking back. Then she stood, her beads soft in the dawn, and walked away into a city that eats secrets and still somehow gives small mercies. People say the king fasted until his bones spoke. He walked barefoot in his private yard and asked the earth to forgive the lies it told for the sake of a kingdom. He called seed, soil, sun, and rain to sit with him. He asked his gods if power is ever worth the price, if protection needs a darkness that ends up swallowing the light. No one heard the answer. Some nights, from the palace wall, guards heard a man singing a lullaby in a voice too deep for a child. The story moved across Nigeria like lightning that had decided to stay. In Lagos, downfall drivers told it at bus stops. In Abuja, senators discussed it softly over tea and leaned back in their chairs with faces that understood too much. In Port Harcourt, welders paused to say, "Love can be a trap if you close your eyes." In Kanu, traders shook their heads and said, "The heart does not fear what it cannot see." Radio hosts made it a mystery with no jokes. Young lovers held each other too tightly for a few days and then relaxed because youth always thinks its own story will end better. Time, as always, did its slow work. The city healed in public and carried certain pains in private. Efe's footsteps disappeared into the crowd of Lagos, where everyone is both seen and hidden. Osaige stayed near the prince and learned how to speak without pushing a broken bridge to carry weight. The Yashe stopped tapping his staff so hard. The older queens prayed in a new tone that no one had heard them use before. One evening, months later, when Hamatan made the hair taste like chalk and fires wrote thin lines in the sky, a boy walking home from fetching water heard singing near the palace wall. He stopped because madness and genius often sing the same tune. He found the prince sitting on the ground, drawing a map in the dust with his finger. The boy waited, because boys are curious and people love stories even when they do not understand them. The prince looked up and smiled a soft, gentle smile that old women remember for weeks. "Do you know the road to Lagos?" the prince asked. The boy nodded. "I know many roads," he said. The prince laughed without sadness this time. He pointed at his chest. "There's a road here that leads everywhere," he said, tapping his heart. "But I lost the signpost." The boy nodded like someone who understood things beyond his years. He sat beside the prince and started to draw his own lines in the dust. Together, they made roads that meant nothing and everything. Together, they made a small city that would blow away at dawn. Together, they made a moment that would live inside a child's memory like a bright coin. People will argue forever about this story. Some will say the king was right to do what he did. Some will say he had planted thorns and then cried when blood came. Some will say Efe was both victim and survival, a woman pushed by hunger and then by power, who tried to choose love and found only a cliff. Some will say the prince was a good man in the wrong story, and the wrong story is often stronger than good men. But everyone will agree on one thing. Love built on secrets will destroy even royalty. It will chew careful hearts and spit them out where crowds can see and learn. And the ending will remain the part that hushes rooms. The day the king came back from the shrine after another long prayer, he found the prince standing at the gate in a neat white buba, hair combed, eyes calm like a lagoon at dawn. For a heartbeat, the king believed a miracle had come to sit on his roof. He walked faster, hope rising like a kite. My son, he began. Eromosele turned slowly, smiled the sweetest smile, and said, Father, do you know where I can buy a new shadow? This one no longer follows me. He laughed softly, beautiful and far away, then walked past his father like a breeze that did not feel skin. He stepped into the street, raised his hands to the sky, and called, Imade, can you hear the rain? The clear blue day answered with sun. He laughed again, more gently this time, and the old kingdom felt something inside it shift forever. Some nights, when rain is gentle in Benin, and the power is out, and candles make everyone's face look honest, people tell this story in low voices. They say it with love and with warning. They say it to remind themselves that the heart must learn to be true before it chooses a road. They say it to teach children that secrets grow teeth. They end it the same way, always, with a shiver that is both sadness and wisdom. A prince fell in love with his father's wife, discovered she was his lost fiancée, and lost his mind where the world could see. The earth kept turning. The market opened the next day, but something in the city learned a new caution. In the quiet after the last word, everyone remembers the moral that outlived all the noise. Love built on secrets will destroy even royalty. And somewhere in the palace, a map in dust waits for a wind that understands. The end. The moral lesson of this story is love built on secrets will destroy even royalty. Please kindly leave a comment, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.